And these are the things we're going to cover today in our talk about preparing your ornamental garden for winter. And as I said, the weather does feel quite a bit cooler. I realize we had 115-degree temperatures, but it's feeling a bit cooler. And I think that's why people are asking questions about what do I do when? As I said earlier, the first frost date in the Willamette Valley is anywhere between October the 25th and November 6th. It varies from place to place because we have little microclimates in our gardens. But keep an eye on your garden and make sure you bring in any of those tender plants so that you can overwinter them before it gets too cold. Be sure to clean off their leaves by washing them with a disposable cloth. And peek around in there really well to make sure that you don't have any pests or insect eggs. Would not be fun to let them be nice and warm in your greenhouse or garage for the remainder of the winter. Watching the cold temperatures and keeping an eye on your annuals and perennials will inform the next things you're going to do. Now, Jane's going to talk about mulching and composting.
Okay, thanks, Cheryl. It'll help your plants at this time of year to work some compost into your soil. The compost will improve drainage, plus soils that are high in organic matter tend to stay warmer in the winter, thus reducing your plant loss. This is also the perfect time to test your pH using a soil test from your local nursery or garden store. If your soil pH is too low, you can add lime. And if your soil pH is too high, you can add sulfur. Now, OSU has links that will provide you with information on soil testing. We're also going to talk about adding organic matter as a mulch on top of the soil, not necessarily into the soil, but on top of the soil. And this will also is a way to help keep the soil warmer in the winter time. Plus, it will help with weed suppression and it'll conservation of the soil. Now, just be safe. You should do a complete soil test every couple of years to be sure that the organic matter that you are adding into your soil has not raised the phosphorus in the soil to an unhealthy level. So now about slugs. To reduce your slug population next spring, now is a good time to look for the slugs and for the slug eggs. You'll find them under boards or under rocks or in dense foliage. You can dispose of them by squashing them or drop them into a bucket of soapy water. That's probably the easiest way. If you are going to use a commercial bait, be sure to follow the directions on the package to make sure that they are safe and that you will get the optimum results. So now, Cheryl, do you want to talk about disease plants?
Thanks, Jane. I would love to. You know, we did have a question about a week ago about powdery mildew, and they're concerned about why their beautiful lupin was looking kind of sad. Well, now's the time to remove and destroy disease plants before they infect your neighbors. It's easier to spot tree and shrub diseases when the leaves are present. This time of the year, powdery mildew is extremely common and seen on perennials like Monarda, nasturtiums, columbine, and lupin. Making sure your plants have plenty of space around them for circulation does minimize that problem, but be sure and remove that infected plant material so it doesn't spread to your other plants. And when you dispose of that plant material, be really careful. Unless your compost heats up to 160 degrees or higher, it's really best to place any diseased plant parts in the garbage, not the compost. You might also spot some diseased branches on your trees or shrubs. If you do, prune them 2 or 3 inches below the infected area, and be cognizant of this diagram that shows you the proper cut. If you cut into the infected parts of the limb, sterilize your pruning equipment by wiping with rubbing alcohol or a solution of household bleach and 9 parts of water. You don't want to spread a shrub or tree disease to other healthy plants. Now, Jane's going to give you some ideas to consider regarding the self-sowing of seeds and seed saving.
All right. Now, this is the time that you might want to consider letting some of your ornamental plants self-sow in the fall. Self-sowing simply means allowing the plants to drop its seeds after flowering. The new seedlings will then come up in the spring, and at that time you can thin them and sculpt them to the color pattern that you want. Some of the flowers that self-sow real easily are sweet peas, sunflowers, columbines, poppies, calendula, nasturtiums, alyssum, and even petunias can be nurtured this way to return year after year. Now, you also might want to gather up some herbs and some seed heads and flowers for drying. After the flowers bloom, you collect the seed heads from the spent flowers, you spread them out on a piece of paper to dry for about a week. And then after they're dry, you have to sort out some of the debris that you have in there, put them in an envelope, and keep them in a dry place until you're ready to plant in the spring. But you need to be sure that you use only non-hybridized varieties. Otherwise, the plants that come up will not come true to seed. So now Cheryl is going to talk to you about preparing your perennials and shrubs for winter.
All you rose growers know this answer because you've probably got more than one rose plant. But for those of you that just planted a rose this year, this is the time when roses are pruned down to protect them from wind and bad weather. All through the summer, you've pruned them to keep new growth coming and get the flowers going. But now we need to think about what's upcoming. So prune them to about 30 inches high, and that's about hip high. And not precisely, and just protect them from being buffeted around. And then in February and mid-March, just about the time when they're starting to put on new growth, you can complete the pruning process. Summer blooming shrubs, you prune those in late winter or early spring when they're dormant and you can see their plant structure. The goal of pruning your shrubs is to maintain their plant health, to improve the quality of the flowers and fruit or foliage, and to restrict the growth, because those of us that live in urban neighborhoods and we buy shrubs that may perhaps be larger than they should be, but it will restrict their growth. You should avoid fall pruning of shrubs since it will stimulate new growth, and that makes them really susceptible to the cold, and you don't want them to be damaged. Now the question is, why cut back your perennials at all? Well, you cut them back to keep their garden neat and tidy through the winter, and also to ensure vibrant and plentiful blooms next season. Removing the spent blooms helps a plant recharge its roots and resources. As we discussed earlier, it keeps the pests and diseases at bay. However, as with many gardening questions, the answer of how to deal with perennials depends. If you have herbaceous perennials, such as hosta, daylilies, astilbes, monardas, and peonies, they're going to die back to the ground in the fall when it gets really cold and reemerge in the spring. And once frost turns their tops brown, prune them to the ground and remove all their debris. Semi-herbaceous perennials, such as rudbeckias, penstemon, and shasta daisies, will lose their upper foliage to cold, but they retain their basal foliage at the base by the roots. Remove the tops, but leave 2 or 3 inches of green foliage at the base. And don't be like me, who goes out to the garden way too early. Don't be in a rush to hurry outside and cut back plants. Unless your plants appear to have disease or are infected, wait until several hard frosts have killed back the tops. Allow those roots time to reclaim the energy from that dying plant so it will keep it strong for its reemergence in the spring. And even consider leaving some perennials standing to add winter interest to your garden. Standing perennial seed pods provide food for the birds, and in addition, overwintering birds find protection in those plant stubs and shrubs. And now I want Jane to tell me when I can plant all those bulbs I bought on sale.
Well, actually, Cheryl, now is the time to plant those lovely blooming bulbs that we all love to see in the spring. The best time to plant actually is from September to late October. Now you have to remember to plant your bulbs at the correct depth and add mulch and fertilizer into the soil at the time of planting. And you can find a lot of that information on our OSU websites. A little warning, excuse me. Also, we're going to talk about dividing and transplanting some plants on the next slide. It's also time that we do that. You want to divide your large perennials such as daylilies, hellebores, and hostas, and this will control their size and their rebloom, and they will be new to rebloom. You divide the plants when you want more of them, or if they're becoming too large for a space. But you want to never divide a blooming plant. Wait until it is done blooming. And here's a little hint that you need to remember, and that is to divide spring and summer blooming plants in the fall But if you have a late summer or a fall blooming plant, you are going to divide those in the spring. And a little warning here, due to invasive pests such as the Japanese beetle and the jumping worm that we now have in our area, it's not recommended that you share plants with your neighbors or in plant swaps, because doing that, you may find those invasives in your soil and you don't want to move them from one area to another. Now I'm going to talk about staking a tree a little bit here. If you're going to plant a new tree, this is also the season that's a good time in the fall to plant a new tree. So if you're going to plant a deciduous tree, you might want to stake it before we get our strong winter winds. You'll need to stake it if the top is real heavy or if it's in a really windy location. Now to do this, you should drive the stakes in the ground before you plant your tree if possible. This way you avoid hurting the roots of the tree. You're going to put the ties on the lower 1/3 of the plant and be sure that it's loose enough. That plant needs to wiggle back and forth a little bit so that the roots know that they need to hold on to the soil. If you have it too tight, the roots aren't going to hold on to the soil. So also be careful of the materials that you're going to use, that you don't damage the bark and that you keep the tree staked no longer than a year. Now, some of you have tender bulbs and such as dahlias and begonias and cannas and gladiolas that you're worried about through the wintertime. So now is the time that you can dig those bulbs or tubers up, harden them off, and then store them in some peat moss through the winter in a cool, dark place. The timing of the digging and the storage varies from plant to plant, so be sure you do your research first. So Cheryl, what am I supposed to do about my ornamental grasses now?
Aren't they beautiful? They are structurally so attractive and they have lovely seed heads. You know, just leave them through the fall and winter. They add interest to your garden, and the best time to prune them is in the spring when you see the little new shoots coming out. So other perennials like coneflower, Joe Pye weed, black-eyed Susan, they provide wonderful seed heads and they are very attractive in your garden. So consider leaving them until spring for pruning. Now the big question, should you rake those leaves or should you leave those leaves on your garden? Well, leaves protect from cold, add nutrients, suppress weeds, encourage worm activity, and help open up the soil structure to keep it draining well. And because host trees for the butterfly and moth larvae and pupae are likely to have attached to the leaves or the stems of the leaves or in the leaf litter, the current recommendation is that if you can, leave your fallen leaves. Those rascally slugs do like that leaf litter as well. And if this is something that really, really troubles you, consider moving the leaves to a separate pile, so that you still preserve the invertebrate, but the slugs, you can treat for slugs more easily and they're not surrounding your plants. And now Jane's going to talk about how to store away those herbicides you might have used.
Okay, now is a really good time to sharpen your pruners and your other cutting tools. And so, because you're probably not going to be using them very much in the wintertime, so you want to get them ready for spring when it's time to get them out of your storage again. You'll want to clean them, sand them, and put oil on all your gardening tools before you store them. And be sure that all your chemicals are in a secure, dry place, away from kids and away from pets. If you do have old chemicals that you need to get rid of, you need to take them to a hazardous waste dump. Now, we want to thank you for joining us this week, and please check out all our gardening resources that we have, and join us next week when we talk about soils. So goodbye, everybody, and have a good day.
Bye.